into the implementation recommendations. So the project goals, kind of going along with those guiding principles, the three main goals were improving safety, working on mobility and comfort for those that are walking and biking, and then increasing those rates. So we did a bit of analysis on the community using a lot of our GIS-based tools, looking at where we saw population densities, also looking at employment, and really where those existing connections were to both the pedestrian and bicycle network. And so we were able to kind of overlay a lot of that data to really pinpoint the needs where we saw them. So here's an example of the needs analysis. Again, looking at poverty, non-white, dependent ages, disability status, again, helping us focus on those areas that didn't always see the investment as other parts of the cities do, to really help us target where we wanted to look further to invest those improvements to both the bicycle and the pedestrian networks. And then the other piece was looking at the level of traffic stress. So for bicycles in particular, looking to have a low number, which means no stress, a bike facility that, is comfortable, again, for those all ages, all abilities. Anybody from, an 8-year-old to an 80-year-old feels safe and comfortable going on that facility. And then that goes all the way up to a 4, which is your high stress, not really a dedicated bike facility that only the kind of strong and fearless bicyclists will ride on, roughly 5% of the population. So really targeting towards getting the existing network and future network to be level of traffic stress 1 or 2. So again, being able to overlay those gave us the opportunity to really focus in on where, not just using lines on the page on having a bike network every quarter mile, but really being able to focus on where those critical needs were, and then being able to take that information into the next stage. And I'll hand it to Blue to talk through some of our engagement.
Excellent. Thanks, Cody. So whenever we're doing our engagement, we really start with these community profiles. This is a way for us to at least look at the demographic information as far as the data. One thing that's very clear, though, is when you start looking at these, this doesn't tell the story of what a community is made up of. All this is doing is showing us where people are and some of the high-level information. How many people live in this area? What is maybe the median cost of housing in the area? But once again, does not tell us the entire story of the population. So that's where we really start to dive in deeper once we move into next phase, which is really looking at their commuter profiles. So as you can see, we have a couple very small little slivers over on the side. These are the people who are walking. These are the people who are biking. Very, very small. And this project was trying to focus on how do we change those profiles? How do we make it easier to start to actually get to work, or to be able to use better facilities, or just be able to bike for leisure? And so we already knew that 30% of workers in Grand Forks have a commute that's less than 10 minutes. That's very easy to replace those vehicular traffic transportation methods into biking and walking. And so 50% of Greater Grand Forks workers commute less than 15 minutes. So these ones maybe aren't as easy for the pedestrians to walk, but once again, having a good bicycle network really starts to encourage people to use cycling tracks or to be able to cycle to work. So from there, we started looking at who is walking in Grand Forks. So like I said, we have data, we have the numbers of people, but it's not the story of who is walking. And so this is where we started to dive in here of looking at how many households maybe are a single vehicle household. And then also, what are the different things that they're using as far as to walk? What are they walking to downtown? Are they walking to recreation? And this also led into another part that Cody will talk about, which was our safe routes to school. Like I said, we're trying to make sure that this network is good for 8 to 80, like Cody said, and make it safe for everybody to be able to utilize. So with that, we also started looking at who is cycling in Grand Forks. Cody already talked about the level of stress. Not many people are comfortable on those high-level stress roads. So how can this study go in there and actually start to make it easier and more accessible for people? At all of our different public input opportunities, we heard that 40% of people would like to walk if it felt safer. And so this was a guiding principle throughout the entire project. So one of the benefits that I got to bring to this project was that I ran the bike share in Grand Forks. This is a completely free bike share that we had, and this really started to show the cultural shift in Grand Forks of not just a need for better facilities, but also the usership was there. Anytime that you tried to do new things, people were willing to jump on these. And so it was a big cultural shift for the Grand Forks area because we saw that by making it completely free, not only do people want better facilities, but they also still want to ride. And so when they didn't have the impediment of getting onto a bicycle, we saw that change very easily and helped to guide this project. So, like I said, before I actually joined Bolton Menk, this was one of my roles, was a steering committee member on this project. So for me, this one is very near and dear to my heart because I got to work a little bit on it in the Bolton and Menk world, but I got to actually work on it as a stakeholder. And this was a fantastic role for all of those different organizations in the community because they got to have their voice heard. They also got to be part of this entire process, and they got to see what implementable projects they could start to align with and start to look at for their own future organizations. So the Downtown Development Association started looking at how do we pilot some of these different routes? How do we pilot some of these different opportunities? Blue Zones is still looking at those things, and it's helped build a better bike share network as well because now they're getting adaptable bikes. So people who are in handicap accessible scenarios can actually start to use the bike share in Grand Forks because of projects exactly like this. It helped to get additional funding. This project steering committee really was an opportunity for Bolton and Menk to hear from the community. Public input is sometimes a little challenging in Grand Forks, and so this was an opportunity to hear directly from city leaders, from organizational leaders, from community-based organizations, how the community is going to feel before even taking it out for some of those different public input opportunities. So, like I said, public input opportunities. This was everything from open houses to having a bicycle pedestrian subcommittee in Grand Forks that really focuses in on the Greenway trail system, but also just how the network works for the Grand Forks area. There was everything from a community bike audit, which you've probably seen a couple pictures in here. This was a good opportunity for people to come and bike around Grand Forks and see where maybe some of those more difficult areas are. We also used a really nice interactive online mapping tool. This gave people the opportunity to give their own feedback no matter where they were, so weren't necessarily coming to those open houses or being forced to be in those areas. And we got to start seeing what the public told us. We knew that 95% of people supported investments in biking and walking. We also knew that 89% of people prefer to live in walkable and bikeable areas. And 47% of people said Greater Grand Forks wasn't very good. So this is a perfect opportunity for this project to go in there and really start to identify some of those different things that could actually help to solve the issues. Looking at the different connectors, looking at the bridges, the railroad crossings, signage and wayfinding, all of these were some of the different guiding identification pieces of the project. And with our two public open houses, we really got to start to hear from people directly on what their identified issues were. So these weren't always huge turnouts of people, but it was people who were there to really share their stories, share what they felt about the Grand Forks area and how they could put their input into this project. From that, we got to have everything from these amazing newsletters that went out. We got to have the design context, and we really got to start to identify those issues and those areas and how it would look if we started to put in some implementation.
Yep, and with that, another key piece of this was actually taking around 5 kind of priority areas for both the cities of Grand Forks and East Grand Forks that they identified were kind of, you know, up next or in the very near future that had a few more technical issues that they were already aware of. So we were able to take a deeper dive in a few of those corridors and have some kind of one-off neighborhood meetings to start to get that feedback that kind of would help jumpstart both cities in progressing those projects forward, that they already had an understanding of where the neighborhood would be coming from. Was there general support? Was there general, discomfort with what the project was trying to do, so that they could set themselves up better for when the project is actually coming along. So out of that, we got a number of recommendations. Around 130 miles of facilities were recommended. Overall, the pedestrian network is relatively complete in both Grand Forks and East Grand Forks. So just a few missing gaps there, and then really looking at making sure that those networks are identified in the developing areas of both cities, so that as development continues and keeps going, that network continues to grow with it. The bigger part was the creation of the kind of the shared use path network. That's where we saw a few more gaps, especially in those east-west connections getting across Grand Forks. There is a number of good north-south spines, but the east-west connections were that major missing piece. Another part of the study that came out was we did safe routes to school for all of the elementary and middle schools in both Grand Forks and East Grand Forks. So being able to develop that with our steering committee and having the Safe Kids and the schools involved in that process also got us to a good set of those safe routes to school plans that were able to be worked on with those schools, and then as well handed off in a format that they could continue to update without needing GIS skills or other things to make sure those are continue to be updated as schools change what's happening around them. Here's an example of one of those. So this was all put into a PowerPoint template. So again, anybody could get in there and move a line, add a sign, remove a sign as those areas continue to change over time, so that they are not just a stamp in time safe routes to school plan, but can continually evolve with the corridors around them. One of the other big pieces was working through a prioritization matrix. Again, working with those in city engineering, city planning, on how we wanted to rank our prioritization, what we wanted to focus on. Was the employment density the most critical factor that we were trying to go after, or was it the connection to the Red River Greenway? Was it fixing those sidewalk gaps? And so we were able to put together that prioritization that really helped, again, kind of line up those projects in the order that they wanted to go in.
One of the best pieces of being on this steering committee was the opportunity to actually put input into this, because we knew what maybe was happening in the next 5 years, both in terms of development, but also in terms of what the city was going to look like. And so this was such a valuable piece for this steering committee to have a voice in this, and then also be able to work directly alongside the city, both cities, the MPO, and really be able to start to target those different things that organizations could be the champions for as well.
So with that, we kind of got the priority projects going. So we ended up with 11 projects and 7 corridors in Grand Forks, and then 13 projects on 9 corridors in East Grand Forks. And then again, going back to that additional engagement around those kind of 5 priority corridors. So we had University Avenue in Grand Forks, right off UND campus. We had 13th Avenue South, from Columbia Road to the Red River Greenway, and then we had 17th Avenue South. Again, focusing on those missing east-west connectors throughout the city was kind of the key priority there. Again, you had some connections up at UND. There were a couple connections further south, but really getting those east-west connectors in the core of Grand Forks was kind of part of their priority that we got. And then in East Grand Forks, we looked at River Road and Reinhardt Drive, one connecting a shared use path to the levee, to that greenway system. The other was looking at how we could fix some sidewalk gaps in the south end of East Grand Forks. So again, being able to go out and engage with those communities, show them kind of what, through our process, what those options were looking like to, either create those new bicycle connections or create those added pedestrian facilities, so we could start to get that feedback. Mostly positive, but we did have, a few naysayers that were there too on, why are you looking at this corridor? Why don't you look 2 blocks south or 2 blocks north? We don't want it here. We're going to lose our parking. So having some of those conversations up front then again is helping the city, that they know what they need to tackle as they put together their scope for those particular projects.
And I know I sound like a broken record on this one, but with those community engagement opportunities, by working with those community-based organizations from the steering committee, it did help. It helped that we were able to be local voices for this project, and we were able to almost sometimes massage those conversations through and let people understand the greater good of this entire project.
So the other piece of those implementation matrix and prioritization was also assembling some cost estimation that the cities in the MPO could use as they start to put together those projects. So everything from what it would, rough cost to put in a concrete shared use path, or widen a sidewalk, or, create some curb extensions in the intersection to shorten pedestrian crossings, signal enhancements, all the way to some of the more amenities of kiosks and wayfinding. Again, just to be able to help create those capital projects that weren't maybe in the capital plan when we started this process, but then giving them the information they needed so that they could properly scope these and get these in that capital improvement plan. The other piece was also looking at all of the policies and different programs that both of the cities had, and finding any recommendations that we could do to make walking and biking more accessible. And there are certain policies and procedures that can help do that. But then also looking at, how can we help get support for, getting them on the National Walk Friendly Community or Bike Friendly Community through the League of American Bicyclists. So again, engaging with the steering committee, working with the public engagement, and working through all those different policies then gave us some of that other kind of softer side of how we can increase the accessibility for walking and biking in Greater Grand Forks. And with that, I think we're up for any questions.
Did you guys look at mass transit locations in town? I noticed in that map that you're showing things going like the Amtrak station, and that's right next to a 40-mile-an-hour road, and a lot of people walking on the road
Mm-hmm.
because of that lack of pedestrian traffic.
Yeah, we did include, that was within the boundary of where we were looking at, and looking at that sidewalk gap was part of that. I'm not sure how it maybe got cut off on the map that we put up there, but it was part of the overall project area.
Good, yeah, 'cause that's the concern, 'cause I see that every day, and I come across plenty of pedestrians.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it was a piece that I know during some of our steering committee meetings we were talking about, because it's not just make bicycling and walking safer for Grand Forkians and East Grand Forkians, it's also for visitors and it's people who are coming in. And so how do we start to make those connections? It was something that the city engineering brought up as well.
Yeah, and we also reached out and worked with BNSF and met with them to just get them in communication with the city of Grand Forks and East Grand Forks on just how their operations worked and how best to coordinate with them in the future as projects come along, what their expectations are from the local government, and then kind of setting those expectations of of what the cities would expect from BNSF. So that was a helpful conversation to get that started and be kind of out in the open.
You mentioned state routes. What other funding sources are available for this type of work? You guys come across those and utilizing them?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a number of funding sources for bicycle and pedestrian projects. You can get HSIP dollars, Highway Safety Improvement Plan dollars. The state of Minnesota has some active transportation grants through MnDOT.
Well, and even, I mean, like I said, with the bike share, this study actually helped to receive some different grant dollars from AARP and a couple different smaller grants in that way. So it was really neat to see both Safe Kids, the Downtown Association. This study brought that opportunity for them. So it's easy sometimes to think of just the big dollar signs on the big infrastructure pieces, but to change biking and walking in a community, it also starts with those policy decisions. It also starts with those users and maybe the organizations who really advocate for them. And so, at least for that local sense, there was a lot of money that got opened because of this.
I noticed one thing they got worked in Bismarck, when they built more counties, urban counties, detention centers, they put it out there, and I drove by this, I live south, and I was driving by it. And after they got it built, they would take the people that they took in for drunks or whatever, that they would just release anymore. Whenever their hours are up, out the door they went. Those guys are walking, I don't know, everyone has black, but they're walking along that road, and they get to the bridge that has no sidewalk on it. They're walking across the bridge that has no sidewalk. I think finally after enough concern, they started having someone there just to run them through the wall, because that's where they're all going. But I just thought, if my kid or my wife, or me run over one of those people, you're gonna have to live with that, and I think you got to commit. So when they have future projects like that probably maybe will have a lot of spending money, they should be looking at what kind of, what the operations are. And that was a big miss, I think. It was, they built a halfway house, so people walk along there, so not a sidewalk,
Well, and I know,
the stone is hit, they're walking in the middle of the road, in black, and it's just terrible.
and it's something that I know, at least federally, they're starting to push for the Safe Streets for All programs, things like that, which at least start to identify how do we look forward instead of just looking at existing conditions. So it's something that I know the Bismarck MPO is working on. I mean, Fargo and Grand Forks are both working on as well. So it's good to see those things, and it's part of the conversations with stakeholders and with groups is where are we missing and how can we do better on it.
Yep. And I think that was a key part of when we were looking at the future network, the plan network, was knowing what some of those future developments were or where they were going to be at least, so that, again, we could at least put the lines on the map that, hey, you need to think about this as those things happen. Obviously, we're not going to draw in every sidewalk that's going to hopefully be developed, but having that direction, then the city's able to go to those developers or other people and like, okay, this is what we need. Let's make sure we're talking about it.
It seems like just in the past, some of those industrial areas, they didn't require anyone to go to sidewalks.
Mhm.
Stuff. So they're just like that. Because, that stuff was developed 30 years ago, 40 years ago. They never put it in. And I know they're trying to.
Mm-hmm. For the bike and ped plan? Yep, the plan is up online on the MPO's website that has the full plan document. So it has all of those tables of the various priority projects. Mm-hmm.
What other data sources do you use besides public input?
I know just from, at least for our organization, we had bike tracking data to a certain extent with that bike share. So it wasn't here's exactly where bikes are going, but it was here's where they're starting and ending, and being able to share that, at least you can start to identify where people are starting their bike rides, which is a huge amount of information. And I know you guys had.
Yeah, and then we had a lot of good GIS data from the cities and the MPO to help overlay on top of that, again, in existing condition formats, as well as other information that they were going through with the transit plan and the streets and highway plan that were kind of going concurrently at the same time. So, lots. Was there a second question?
I was just wondering about the, this being input into the state transition plan, part of it being,
This is not part of the ADA transition plan. It's a separate document, separate plan.
And I believe that the city of Grand Forks is working on their ADA transition plan. And so it's very accessible information for who's working on that.
I like all the effort you guys put up front end with steering committees and things like that. Was there anything on the back end with working with city maintenance? During winter, ADA ramps are completely filled with 18 inches of snow, and truthfully, that's sure we walking like off. So it actually slows down a lot of pedestrian and bicycle traffic in winter. So maybe there needs to be a partnership there with the maintenance crews as far as cleaning up those intersections.
Yep, that's a very good point. We didn't connect directly with the city maintenance crews or personnel. We did get some input from our city engineering and committee members, but it's a fantastic point. It's true. It's one of those difficult things living in the northern region on what do you do when it snows? How do you get that cleared off? Whose responsibility is it to clear those off?
In some of the areas of the bike paths, like say along Washington, where that's kind of on its own, and it's realistically probably the business's responsibility is
And it was that weird role where I got to still be in my previous career and now here. We work directly with the city, especially for downtown, to make sure how do we create better plans? How do we create better communication? And so projects like this and studies like this really did give us some at least ammunition. I don't want to say it that way because it makes it sound a little hostile, but it gave us the at least opportunity to have a conversation around, hey, we're really trying to incentivize these things. How can we start to look at it? And you're right. I mean, we have an amazing greenway trail system that stays cleared. It can be difficult once you start getting into right-of-ways, landowners, and all of those conversations. Mm-hmm.
We did talk about it. I think we identified it as on the priority list of creating that better connection. We didn't call out, a specific bridge location or anything like that for a new bridge or anything like that, but we did identify that as one of the critical pieces of getting across the river, especially towards the south end of town. And
exactly like you said, the pier in the middle of the river gets identified by a lot of different studies, different things as an opportunity. And I think the biggest difficulty for Grand Forks is the cost. It would be such a beneficial thing to the community, but it would also cost an arm and a leg for what some people often view as maybe not the most beneficial, while studies like this have done a really good job of starting to demonstrate the value of something like that. And I think whenever this can be paired with local organizations, be it economic development organizations who can say, look, we already see benefits from biking and walking. Here's some more information that helps us maybe apply for another grant or at least further that conversation each time. a lot of different public input opportunities, so at the open houses, but also the interactive online mapping was one, and then
Online surveys.
online surveys was also a huge tool for us.
We got a good amount of feedback through the online surveys. A lot of our best communications was through that digital interface, being able for people to respond at their leisure versus coming and writing on a comment card in a 2-hour window on a Tuesday night. Got a lot more and more valuable feedback through a lot of those more individualized engagements.
People in the area have a lot of opinions, but they also don't have a lot of time sometimes, so all of those online options, and this was also happening 21 to 23 roughly, so it was at a kind of a different time as far as engagement opportunities too. Some people weren't as comfortable going out, so those online tools really gave good feedback throughout.
And you talked about the DOTS level that you told them.
Mm-hmm.
Were those looking at just the existing conditions, or did you sort of morph that into what are the desired conditions?
So those were for the existing conditions based on existing traffic, speeds, volumes, presence of any sort of buffer between that bike facility and vehicular traffic. There's like 12 different items that go into developing that BLTS number. We didn't morph that into the future conditions. It was more of, the plan is for those future bike facilities to be a 1 or 2. We don't want to plan a level 4 bike facility, because again, that's not going to get used. But if you make that a 1 or 2, so it's a shared use path that's completely separate from traffic, or it's a specific cycle track or bikeway that again has it separate from PEDs and separate from traffic versus an on-street bike lane in a 40-mile-an-hour, 10,000 vehicle a day road.
Maybe a follow-up question to that. If you have an existing level 4, for example,
Yep.
did you then just essentially avoid that relic for future, or did you, assuming you're just going to need a much higher level of investment to get to a valuable path?
Right. So those level 4s then would be identified as, this is a corridor that we want to make into a 1 or 2. So again, maybe the existing condition is there are no bike facilities. So you're riding in the street with the cars, with no bike lane or sharrows or anything. That would still get identified that you want to make that into a level 2 corridor in the future, and then we have facility guidelines as part of the plan that say, if this is a arterial road, in order for that to be a level 2, it needs to be completely curb separated from that roadway. Or if it's maybe it's a slower road or has less traffic, but it's still a level 3 or 4 today, you could make it a 1 or 2 by maybe a bike lane would suffice, because they are slower speeds or less vehicles. So it was used to help identify those that needed improvement.
Great presentation, I think. I don't know if you guys heard of Menk, but there's a university, effort to engage small-scale research with communities, and I was actually thinking about maybe doing some stuff like that. I know that you think of walkability and bikeability, for example, so I'm really happy that there are some novel new areas and definitely I'll be follow up with you on that.
Yes.
Talk about it. But one thing that when I thought about it is kind of interesting, challenging is because transport the cost, right? And that's one thing I want to know, maybe how much of the shooting went into the funding. And then other question, although we have a very nice winter, past winter, but normally about 4 or 5 months over here, we normally have walking, biking, not very feasible. So I wonder how that would affect the
So on the winter biking, winter walking, that did come up through many of our conversations with the local residents on, or even just to the, why are we investing in this if we can only use it 6, 7, 8 months of the year? And it's really, while that can be true, those that can say, well, it's cold, I'm not going to walk or bike. It's not just for those folks. It's also for the folks that don't have a car. They have to walk to the bus stop. They, need to take their bike across town because that is their mode of transportation, and it's not always their choice.
And then on that one, I think our boss is
They do have those, and I mean, I'm a 365 cyclist. I like cycling in the winter, actually, and we see all across the planet there are a lot of people who do cycle all year long, and part of it is the facilities. And once you build better facilities, people still are able to start to be able to ride all year long. And exactly like Cody said, an important part of this project wasn't just saying who has the ability to bike or walk. It was also saying who has to, who that is their only mode of transportation. So it did factor into it, and it's part of those policy discussions. It's part of those implementation discussions, is because once you have easier disconnected facilities, those can be maintained differently or separate from maybe a typical road. Oh. Yes.
So how many of the participants are involved with those students?
So on the steering committee, we did have one student representative, and then also on the bike ped committee, there was maybe 2 or 3. And so it's hard because saying one student represents all of the student body isn't maybe accurate, but it was somebody who was there speaking on behalf. And for the bike share, majority of the riders, I think 80% of those riders are college students. And so for us, it was trying to pull as much information about the college students and what kind of facilities they would like to see as well.
Cody, someone asked about funding options for that. In a different state that I worked in, you couldn't rely on the DOT to always provide the TV grants for our bike ped work. So one of the things that we had a lot of success with was working with your local health department, your county health department. They do the CHIA reports, the community health impact assessment, to help identify physical, mental, emotional well-being in the community. And in North Dakota, I think the stat is like, believe it or not, and I'm feeling fluffy right now, it's like 1 every 3 North Dakotans is overweight. And the health department told me really good aid about how to set up research, so that you can get data from the bike ped network and how that impacts health. And then there's a lot of grant money out there that you can pull from the healthcare industry to help fund not only your infrastructure projects, but also your education and encouragement projects that come out of these. We've had a lot of good work with them to bring them in anytime. And then the other group that we tapped was local law enforcement. And of course, right now, law enforcement are looking for any ways to have positive public relations. That, if you found that community weren't actually pulling out on the crash data, it has to be a bicycle incident. And so encourage your community to be tracking that data separately. And then you can start pulling in some of that public safety funding for your enforcement activities and also encouragement activities. We have like bicycle days, policemen, and bike patrol. So those are some other kind of other ways instead of always relying on DOT to get us those infrastructure funds to really start pulling in what that other comprehensive aspect of action plans do.
Well, and exactly like you said, it's not always about the big dollars either. Sometimes it is the smaller grants really go a long way, because once you can start to get a cultural shift in a community about biking and walking, it also can start to change the conversation around how do we prioritize infrastructure and how do we start to look at these different projects. And so it just really starts to change the conversation at that level.
Perfect.
Perfect.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for attending and the questions.